Hello, everyone. In this podcast, we will be discussing sensitive topics such as sexual assault. It's important to take care of yourself while listening. Some suggestions are listening while you're in a healthy headspace or knowing who you can reach out to if you become upset. Our 24/7 helpline for crisis calls based out of Central Florida is 407-500-HEAL. By contacting the national hotline at 1-800-656-4673, you can get support and learn about your local resources. There's always someone ready to help. Welcome to the Victim Service Center podcast. Here we sit down with professionals that serve survivors and victims of trauma, or those who've experienced violence, and have conversations about social issues. This week, we are talking about Sexual Assault Anniversaries. My name is Emilie Mitchell. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Education Coordinator at the Victim Service Center of Central Florida. With me today, I have Rhonda Wilson. Rhonda uses she, her pronouns and has been part of the VSC team for 10 years. She has 3 graduate degrees, a Master's of Human Services, an MBA, and a Master in Administration of Justice and Security. Rhonda has over 30 years of experience in criminal and military justice. She served in the U.S. Navy for 20 years. After retiring from the Navy, Rhonda worked as the director of a residential re-entry center for inmates transitioning from federal prisons. Rhonda's goal is to engage the entire community in activities that prevent sexual assault and crime. Thank you so much for being here today, Rhonda.
Emilie, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited about this podcast.
And I also have Rachel Sines. Rachel uses she, her pronouns and is a survivor of a sexual assault and kidnapping following the break-in of her home 14 years ago. Her attacker was given 4 life sentences and 67 years in prison for 13 counts with a firearm. She lives with her husband and a daughter in Winter Garden, Florida, and takes every opportunity to advocate for victims and others seeking a path to healing in order to create something positive from such a dark event. So, Rachel, thank you so much for being here as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on.
I am really excited and honored to have this space and conversation with both of you today. As a just really brief introduction, April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, which is a time to uplift and highlight this issue and talk about ways we can support survivors and end sexual violence. During this month, we will be releasing podcasts highlighting voices of survivors and their healing journeys, as well as advocating for victims' rights and ways we can all do our part in preventing violence. So in this episode, we will be defining what a trauma anniversary is, common reactions survivors can have on these anniversaries, and ways survivors and their supporters can prepare and heal during these moments in their journey. So with that, I'd like to just start off, as I usually do with my podcast, with definitions. So I'd like to just throw it out there. What is a trauma anniversary? How would you define it?
Emilie, I would define it as on the anniversary of a traumatic event, some survivors have to have an increase in distress. And these anniversary reactions can range from feeling mildly upset for a day or two or more extreme reactions. And it's the date that comes up is when they start, having this anniversary of the traumatic event.
Yeah, that's a wonderful definition. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to it, Rachel, as far as defining it.
I think that's a perfect definition. It's really just the anniversary of what may have happened to you. I think we all celebrate things, anniversaries, birthdays, and unfortunately, our time is marked by negative events as well, and we can't help but feel those in our mind and our body when they come back around the sun, if you will.
Yeah, thank you both so much for kind of breaking that down. I wanted to also ask you, Rachel, if you could share a little bit about your story, anything that you'd like to share in regards to the anniversary or anything that you'd like people to know.
So for me, my anniversary is a little unique because it also falls on a holiday for a lot of other people. So it was the eve of Valentine's Day for me, which is supposed to be the holiday of love. So it was a little ironic in some ways when you think about it. And so in a lot of ways, I can't help but know that day is around the corner, because it's on the calendar for all of us. It's just on in my calendar in a different way. So for me, I know my first anniversary, I anticipated it in a big way. I also marked time even prior to it. I remember for a while, it was on a Tuesday, and I marked time by the Tuesday, and then by the 13th, and then by, it's a strange thing that your mind does sometimes with time. But I remember I had anxiety, not severe anxiety, but it was in the back of my mind leading up to it, that it's going to come around the corner. I'm going to remember it. What's going to happen? How am I going to feel? I think more of the nerves were around not knowing how I was going to handle it rather than the anniversary itself. And it came and went. I can say now it's been 14 years, and this year, if it hadn't been for a speaking event about this topic the day before Valentine's Day, actually on my anniversary, I probably wouldn't have recalled it so quickly. I just remember looking at the calendar and I was like, oh my gosh, it's already 14th. So it obviously, I tend to think about it more throughout my days, here and there, than on the anniversary itself, if that makes sense. It's always going to be with me. So now I tend to mark time by how far I've come in my healing on that anniversary, rather than letting me sit in the space of the trauma, if that makes sense.
I really appreciate you sharing your story with us and highlighting all of those things. The reason that we're having this is because I think that there's a lot of survivors out there who might be feeling and a lot of what you were sharing. I wanted to kind of highlight that anticipation that you were talking about, kind of the anxiety around how am I going to feel? And I hope that this podcast kind of helps address that and hopefully gives survivors the tools to do their best as far as getting through those particular milestones that we were talking about. Rhonda, what are some common reactions or anniversary reactions you have seen with your clients as it pertains to coming up on their anniversary of the trauma? And if you could kind of go over kind of the mental, physical, or emotional, any kind of reactions that you see typically.
Absolutely. What I've seen in some of my clients from the past is that they have the fear of the responses that reminds them of the sexual assault. And they're feeling like they're losing control of their life or of their mind. They're re-experiencing the assault over and over again through flashbacks. They can have problems concentrating and staying focused on the task at hand. And I've seen a lot of guilty feelings. They go through the guilt again. They're developing a negative self-image and feeling dirty inside and out. And sometimes, can lead to like the depression and disruptions in close relationships. And some of the clients that have come in and see me, they've had a disruption in their close relationships, and they've lost interest in sex, in intimacy, and they don't know how to get that back. So they feel lost. And then the fear and the anxiety caused from the physical and the mental and behavioral reactions, all of which may lead to the assault, the sexual assault survivor to feel as though he or she has no control over their life again. So these are very important common reactions in their normal responses to a traumatic event such as sexual assault.
Thank you so much. I always like to highlight those so that those who may be listening know that these are normal reactions. I appreciate that you use that word. You mentioned those guilty feelings. So do you think that this is kind of stemming from kind of the victim blaming? Is that usually what they mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And self-blaming, like, for example, I had a client that, Rachel mentioned about a holiday, the Valentine's Day is a holiday. I had one client that went out on St. Patrick's Day, and the sexual assault happened that evening, and she kept self-blaming herself because she was out drinking and all that. And as much as, she had, I ended up referring her to the therapy department, and she did much better and started to feel more better about herself and less of the self-blaming. But it's, that's what I see, a lot of that in our clients, of the self-blaming. Well, if I wouldn't have gone out that night, this wouldn't have happened. And you should be able to go out whenever you want. You should be able to go out and socialize whenever you want, and not have the fear of somebody sexually assaulting you.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's never, ever the victim's fault, the survivor's fault.
Never.
What happened. I can say that until I'm blue in the face, to be honest.
I know. It's not. It's never the victim's fault. And another, and what's also common with this is that the family, you have some friends and family members that don't fully support, the client. And so now they're just being re-victimized all over again.
Unfortunately, that is something I've gone through some of those feelings. Sometimes I think it's just a coping mechanism of our brains to find control over something that was out of our control. We sometimes these enormous things happen to us, and we need to feel like there is just as much of an equivalent explanation for it, when sometimes there just isn't. The simplest explanation sometimes is just bad things happen to good people sometimes, and there's nothing they can do about it. I know that this one individual's path crossed mine one night, and my life was forever changed. And I didn't do anything to deserve it. He was a stranger for me, so it is easier for me to put that in a bucket than other victims, because 9 times out of 10, they know the person that has hurt them. And so there's a lot of other feelings that go along with that, because there's relationships involved. Whereas, I didn't have that. It was a stranger. But it can be very difficult not to put guilt on yourself because of those dynamics. And it is something that, victims, it's just a repetition that's needed. It's not your fault. You didn't do anything. And it was just more bad luck than anything else. But like I said, it's just a way our brains are trying to find control. Sometimes I think that maybe if I dress differently, or maybe if I gain some weight, or maybe if I don't, go drink outside, or maybe if I only date this type of person, it'll never happen to me again. And nothing that you did deserved it in the first place. So changing your behavior isn't going to prevent it either.
That is such a good point, Rachel, to bring up when it comes to that power and control kind of dynamic, especially since we know that things like sexual violence is a crime of power control. It's really not
Mm-hmm.
about the sex. It's really nothing that the victim did to
Mm-hmm.
right. And so it makes a lot of sense why we as a society do victim blaming, because it is that sense of control. If I change my behavior, I can prevent it. When again, it's really not, it's always, the blame is always should be put back onto the perpetrator. That
Mm-hmm.
being said, I hope that do you think that when these sexual assault anniversaries come up, that these emotions are just maybe a little more heightened, that there's just a little bit more kind of victim blaming guilt that's coming with it when it comes around?
I don't really. I was very fortunate to have a supportive circle of friends and family um, that believed me, and believing a victim is key to their first step in healing. This was probably the most traumatic sexual assault I had ever experienced in my life, but it's not to say that I hadn't um, come across other more minor events in my past. Um, and every time, even this time where, somebody broke into my home and had a gun and raped me, um, every single time I hesitated in telling someone because I think it's, when you say the words out loud and you say this happened to me, you're almost kind of admitting it to yourself that it did happen. So you're forcing yourself immediately into a realm of acceptance that maybe you're not entirely ready for yet. But every single time with that hesitation, I knew that I had a mother, friends, family that would believe me and that would support me. Um, and that belief is unfortunately not standard. So for me, I was lucky not to feel a lot of guilt or blaming. The police, especially, always believed me. There was never a point where they were like, "Did this really happen to you? Are you sure? You didn't know him? How? I mean, this doesn't ever happen. This is kind of, there wasn't any of that." And going to the VSC too for my exam and everything, they were patient with me. They were kind. They were. It was done. Everything was done on my terms, and um, and everything that I disclosed to them, they believed me, and that is powerful, because if anybody sows any doubt into a victim's story, um, it allows them that same space, and being in that space ever prevents them from healing. It's a roadblock for them. So, I can see where, in my situation, in my perspective, I was lucky enough, not to fall into that and have a lot of support. And I think that that's probably why I'm a big advocate as well for other victims, because I know that I was very, very lucky in that aspect. And that just in others weren't dealt that hand. Um, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so happy to hear that you had a lot of support. And I'm really glad that the VSC was also there. And just wanted to, again, thank you for being that support for other victims too. And whoever is listening who may not be getting that support, because like you were mentioning, it isn't normalized to believe survivors, and that's really our job, is to normalize that and to start by believing. I just want to say that the VSC is here. You can always reach out. We have that 24/7 helpline, 407-500-HEAL, HEAL, and we'll be here to support you. I wanted to kind of lean in a little bit more, Rachel, because your story is so powerful. And I want to thank you again for sharing it with us and whoever may be listening. Again, you did mention that your sexual assault happened on the eve of Valentine's Day. I wanted to see if you had anything else to share a bit about your experience coming up on that anniversary while also processing the holiday. You talked a little bit about it. You know, how has this impacted your healing journey and what helped you? And what would you say to a survivor who may have a similar story with their sexual assault anniversary taking place around a holiday?
I would just say the most important thing is to be kind to yourself and to be patient with yourself and understand when, if you are feeling anxiety, or you're not sleeping as well, or you're feeling a little off, to take note of that. Don't push it away, embrace it, and think about what that means, and seek outlets, healthy outlets, such as therapy or journaling or walking, or getting into nature or something that will help you unpack that, and understand what that means. Because I think that, a lot of times we don't allow ourselves to work through those feelings and process those feelings because they're painful. So our instinct is to push them away and say, no, I'm going to be strong. I'm not going to think about that. But in reality, it's just like a pressure cooker. The more you do that. And so I would just say that, just to be kind to yourself, allow yourself to have those feelings as they come, and to seek help or seek outlets as you need to, and allow yourself those spaces. Everybody's journey in healing is different. It's not the same for anybody, and everybody starts it on different days and different time periods. For me, I started at day one. For others, it's 10 years later after a lot of other things in between. So it's all very different, and there's no one right way to walk that path. And everybody's path is going to be different. It's going to be rockier in some areas and smoother in others. And I think it's just that you need to allow yourself the space to walk it and to travel it, and on your own terms.
I love that. And I can hear a lot of like empowering in that, where, survivors having the power to decide what their healing journey is, mm-hmm. and also giving themselves the space and grace to, and no judgment, right? As you process mm-hmm. these feelings, all these feelings that you're having is completely normal to things mm-hmm. like trauma, which is always important to highlight. I like what you said about the pressure cooker, because we know that there's a lot of damage that can be done harboring that. And I think, Rhonda, and you might know more about this, isn't it on average the survivors that we work with, it's like 7 years before they reach out for help? Is that right?
Yes, it is. We were looking at our numbers a few years back, and we found out that on average, after a sexual assault, it takes on average for somebody to come in about 7 years afterwards.
Yeah. So again, and of course, like everyone's healing journey is different and everyone's ready at a different time. But I was always shocked to hear that sometimes it does take 7 years before someone it feels safe enough to start their healing journey in that sense. I also, when we were planning this podcast, Rachel, you said something about how you processed the day as deciding to make Valentine's Day about love, in the sense of the love that you and support mm-hmm. that you got. I don't know if you wanted to comment on that at all.
Yeah. So one of the things I try to do a lot, and this is just one of my techniques and my own healing, is to try and flip the script, if you will, and try to find the positivity in what happened to me. And sometimes the search for that can be really hard. It can be like finding a needle in a haystack. But for me, it was my anniversary was on Valentine's Day, which is supposed to be a holiday of love. And obviously, what happened to me was not a loving act. But what I choose to focus on is the things that happened afterwards. And that was that, people and even strangers reached out to me in a way that was very loving. I had, people helping me, strangers praying for me, friends coming out of the woodwork to bring me and give me things I didn't even know I needed. And again, I was super lucky to have that support system in my life, but I was just wrapped in a blanket of love after that. So that is the side of the love that I try to focus on my anniversary days, that there is more love in this world than there is not. We're never going to escape the bad things in life. And, it's needed almost for a balance in our lives, but we, have to focus on those loving things, on those positive things, because there are kernels of that weaved in the fabric of everything that is bad. It's just a matter of finding it. And that just, and for me, what he did to me, what my attacker did to me was, it was awful. And I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. And he was in my life physically for a couple hours. Felt like longer, but it was really only a couple hours time. He will be in my mind, obviously, for the rest of my life, but I choose not to give him more power over me than those moments in my life that he had it. Because the only power over me he has now is that which I choose to give him. So, again, I try to just focus on the positive things that happened from that event. The positive things that, I can do to give back with my story to help others, and do everything I can to make what happened to me a little more worth it, if you will. Sorry if that was a rambly
No. Everything that you're saying is so, so important. And I really appreciate you being so vulnerable and open with us and sharing so much. And I just want to say you do so much for survivors. I just want to say you make such a difference, Rachel. And I'm just completely in awe, honestly. I know that you've spoken for VSC many times, and sharing kind of your journey and with that kind of with the hope as well, and being that person who survivors can reach out to. And I just want to thank you again for being here and sharing once again your experience. I wanted to talk a little bit about the word trigger. Rhonda, I wanted to ask if you could briefly describe what a trigger is. So what examples have you seen with your clients, of course, while remaining confidential, and how can survivors identify if they are being triggered?
For the triggering, it could be anywhere from like a sight, like they might see somebody that resembled the person who sexually assaulted them. It could be, the way they look, their hair color, any situation, where someone else is being abused, or they see something like that happening. An object that was used to be abused. It could also be sound, like anything, like it might be a song that was on the radio, or a song was playing that it reminds them of that event. It could also be smell, like, for example, let's say the abuser wore a certain type of cologne, or, and I'm saying if the abuser or the perpetrator was like a male. It could also be, an odor, a particular odor that they could smell, like the perpetrator might have had like garlic or onion or anything like that. I mean, that's very triggering. It could be a type of touch that like a type of touch of an action that resembles the abuser, of things that occur prior to or after the sexual assault that happened. It could be taste. I mean, like tastes that were experienced during the abuse or during the sexual assault prior to and after the sexual assault. Like, also it could be tobacco, it could be alcohol, it could be anything like that. In managing it, you have to figure out, it's like Rachel was saying, everybody's journey is very, very different. And, you could do grounding techniques like name 5 things you can see in your room right now. I've told clients in the past, it's called the hotline, that were triggered, that if when they were at home, go in your freezer, get a cube of ice, hang on to that cube of ice as tight as you can, hold it over the sink and see how long you can hang on to that. And that focuses them on the ice cube, and then it helps get them grounded. And think of something that you can do good for yourself. I've also talked to clients on the phone where, they're triggered and they're trying to get grounded. And I always say, what's your favorite movie that makes you laugh? Or what's a TV series that you enjoy watching that really makes you enjoy it? And you can start concentrating on that. And a lot of them really go into that, and they really enjoy, like Friends, or they got a comedy movie that they watch just to help them, get through that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's a great tool. It sounds like if a survivor is feeling really heightened because of something that reminds them of the event, or that touch that you were mentioning, they may have just really heightened emotions. Maybe they're remembering, maybe they'll experience some flashbacks, that kind of thing. And it sounds like just being able to kind of focus on something else, get that grounding technique, know who to reach out to as well.
Right. And that's what's important. And, and it goes back to what Rachel was saying earlier. The support system is key, very key for the survivor, very key. And if you're being triggered, then you've got your support system to reach out to, your friends, your family. You have our sexual assault helpline to help you out, or our crisis helpline to help you out. And we do a lot of grounding on the helpline. Also, we have clients that's called and talk to their sexual assault crisis counselor, or, the victim advocate. And so we're always out there. I mean, if the support system's not there for the survivor, you always have our crisis helpline to help you out, to get you through it.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's so many resources out there, like the VSC, that are just waiting to give you that support to help ground you and get you past whatever, if you're ever feeling overwhelmed or anything.
Absolutely. And that's what we're there for.
Thank you, Rhonda. Rachel, I wanted to ask you a little bit as well. Do you find that triggers may occur more frequently closer to the anniversary? And were there any triggers that surprised you, even those not having to do with the anniversary?
Yeah. So for me, I obviously, directly after, I was kind of like a raw nerve. Everything seemed to trigger me. I was jumpy. I didn't sleep well. I remember being in the grocery store and somebody dropped a can of tomatoes behind me, and I thought it was a gunshot, and I jumped up and ran out of the store. People probably thought I was crazy, but and another time I heard a noise in the house, and and I was alone in the house, and I looked out of my bedroom down the hallway, and I thought I saw a shadow standing in the hallway, but really it was the reflection of myself off of a picture hanging on the wall. And I remember screaming and thinking somebody was in my house, and I thought, oh, here we go again. And I remember then coming to the realization that I just scared I was scared of my own shadow, like the old cliche, So I think that, definitely there's a lot of times, and like Rhonda mentioned before, I remember one time I was in a 7-Eleven and I was getting a bottle of water, and I was standing behind somebody that could have been his twin brother. And I remember just getting chills and putting down my water and walking out because I couldn't, and then, of course there was a lot of guilt around that because it was like, this person didn't do it to me, just, you feel silly, but at the same time, you can't help it either. Jamaican accents are hard for me because he had one, a very, very thick one. In fact, it was an identifying characteristic for the police in finding him. And I had a very good friend of mine that had, he was from Jamaica, and I remember having to stop a conversation midway saying, I can't, I'm sorry, I can't right now. And luckily he knew what happened to me, and he understood and was gracious. But I think, a part of it is just, letting people know that, hey, I'm having a hard time right now, or I need some help, or setting some boundaries for yourself. So, knowing what you're capable of. I definitely, it's been 14 years. So luckily I can say that those triggers are farther and farther and fewer between. It doesn't mean I don't get them. I still do. And to your question about the things that surprised me, I find myself actually being triggered by things I see in our society more than like my anniversary or things. Our brains process trauma in very particular ways. And one of the things it does is every time it's like I don't know, like it's like a scab that's scratched, your brain will go back to that same place in your brain where it experienced the trauma before, and it'll remember that and think, oh, this is where I was hurt before. This is where I need to start my processing, my healing. And that's pretty much what a trigger is. It's triggering that part of your brain. And so a lot of those familiar emotions, even though it might be completely isolated events, might feel familiar because it's all coming from the same spot in your brain. So for me, I remember, I remember the Kavanaugh hearings were very, very difficult for me. Seeing a woman who was coming forward with a story, being mocked and not believed purely for who she was accusing, was very difficult. It was also difficult for me because, unfortunately, when I was a teenager, when I was 15 years old, 16 years old, a similar event happened to me. And so to see her treated the way she was, regardless of, and just see her not being believed as the initial reaction was painful. And I remember I had to actually go seek a therapy session because it was difficult for me to see a fellow being treated so horribly. And at the time I was also pregnant, and I didn't know that it was with a little girl, but because we didn't know the gender of our baby until she was born. But I knew this baby, I wanted them to be in a world where if something happened to them, that they would be believed. So that was difficult. January 6th was also very difficult for me, only for the feeling of being attacked, just the feeling of that. Those emotions were similar, and it brought up a lot of things for me and a lot of anxiety. And once again, I had to go reach for some therapy there. And I think that that's what's important, is to know yourself, to allow yourself to be in tune with your emotions, with your feelings, with what you're going through, and be able to, and it sounds easier said than done, but to recognize, hey, I need to go talk to somebody. I'm not doing okay. I need to do something for myself. Self-care is so important. And it's funny how we tend to do for others before we do for ourselves. And it is super important that we be kind to ourselves, and we allow ourselves to have those spaces and to seek help when we need it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rachel. You said such amazing things, and I just wanted to kind of highlight a few of them. It sounds like there are good days and bad days during everyone's healing journey, and I'm really glad to hear that there's few and farther between triggers for you, but I assume that there are some bad days where you're feeling a little more sensitive, and that makes complete sense. It doesn't mean you're going backwards, right? Um, like you said, like a scab that's scratched. That was such a powerful statement too. And it sounds like essentially it's that fight or flight kind of happening, where you're just whatever that makes someone feel unsafe in that moment. They're just trying to protect themselves. I also wanted to highlight that it sounds like triggers are very diverse and different for everyone too. And then just knowing yourself as well, and also just no judgment in regards to it. We talked about earlier about that pressure cooker. If you kind of think that, and if you're judging yourself for feeling these kind of triggers, you won't be able to set those boundaries and address them and reach out to support. So no judgment. Everyone experiences it differently. Everyone has different kinds of triggers too. Rhonda, I wanted to ask you, during the Kavanaugh hearings, were there survivors actually reaching out on the helpline calls about that as well?
Oh, yes. Our hotline calls during that time frame increased. It triggered a lot of survivors out there. And, I'm agreeing with Rachel. It was hard to watch that. It really was, because they were not believing her. And it was tough to watch, even, as a victim advocate and sexual assault crisis counselor. That was hard to watch. And it did trigger a lot of individuals out in our community, and our phone lines did increase because of the Kavanaugh.
And that's why I wanted to kind of highlight that the supporters out there have the power and to be that person that believes someone. And you can make the world of a difference for someone. You might be the first person that they are sharing this with, and just starting by believing and doing our best to not do those victim blaming statements, those kinds of things, you can make the world of a difference for a survivor. So and also just giving them grace as well, and understanding that triggers can come out of nowhere. They can be really diverse, and it's really not about you as a survivor, as a supporter, I should say. It's not about you. Just doing your best to understand, and really when anyone's setting boundaries, they're really just sharing, this is how to love me, this is how to take care of me in this moment, and I'm just taking care of myself. So just wanted to uplift that too. Rhonda, through your work with clients, what have you seen help survivors get through these milestones? We talked a little bit about coping mechanisms. So I wanted to see if you could kind of tell us the difference between a healthy versus an unhealthy coping mechanism.
We'll start with the unhealthy copinism. Sometimes survivors will turn to alcohol. They don't want to get up and go to work, or get up and face the day. The most I've seen was alcohol, or they turn to drugs, or they try to self-medicate, in order to cope, try to get through the feelings that they're going through, and the triggers that they're going through to cope. Or they get into a bad relationship and another unhealthy relationship, and they're not ready for the relationship, but I've just seen them get into some bad relationships, and they're trying to figure out how to cope with that. And that's what I've seen. For the healthy side of coping, which is, I have a lot to see on that, is retail therapy is really awesome. Taking care of yourself, going shopping. pedicures, manicures, do something that makes you feel good. And it's different for everybody, like some are into art. They like to create art. They like to, be creative and open up that creative side of their minds and then put all their feelings, emotions onto that canvas, especially if they're painters. I also seen to where some of them like to take the baths or go to a spa day. It's, just being good to yourself. And Rachel hit it just right. Be kind to yourself and being good to yourself. What's going to make you feel good? And it's different for everybody, but that's what, help to cope in a healthy way. That's the way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that self-care is really individual. I've said it like a million times, I think, on this podcast. So, but I also appreciate you kind of highlighting different self-care as far as like physically taking care of yourself, like getting the sleep that you can, and, eating as, feeding your body essentially, but also like the emotional one of it too, just knowing who to reach out to, that kind of thing.
And also, exercising, our body takes in a lot of stress and our body does not know how to release it. So you have to figure out a way to release it. And exercising helps release that stress out of your body. And I have to admit, after you exercise, even when you don't want to exercise, that's the best time to do it because you end up having the best session possible. So exercising is really good because that helps you with your physical side of you, and your mind and your body go together on that.
Yeah. And there's so many different ways to do it too. So kind of just being open-minded of trying different stuff and seeing what
Absolutely.
works. Yeah.
Absolutely. Lift weights one day, CrossFit one day, row one day, go running one day, go walking. Rollerblading, roller skating, anything like that. Anything physical to make you get out in the outside and smell the fresh air and just do it.
Love it. And what advice would you give to a survivor? What would you say to a survivor, I should say, who is going through their first year anniversary of the trauma?
Well, I would definitely go over the triggering points and in the common reactions, and when we would discuss, one of the first things I'd ask is, who is your support system? Who's going to help support you? And then if they say nobody, then again I would turn around and say, hey, we have our sexual assault or our crisis helpline that can help you once you get to that point. It's like Rachel was saying, the pressure cooker. It gets to the point where they just can't take it, can't take it no more. And they've got to find that release and they got to figure out how to get grounded. So the support system, talking about it with somebody that you feel very safe with, that you can talk to, that's how you do it.
Yeah, it sounds like you almost develop like a safety plan in that sense of just like you were saying, Rachel, you're not sure how you're going to react to it. And so just being like, okay, this is who I can reach out to. This is what I can do. I think that's such great advice.
Or planning something for yourself that day. Like, hey, I'm going to do something nice for myself this day. I'm going to book a massage, I love to take the bath. I have a little basket of little FabFitFun things. I'll pick out my little eye mask and my face mask and my body scrub and my hair and I'll pick out all these little things and my salts, and I'll just it's like a little like ritual almost. I'm like, I'm gonna have a bath, and then I'll sit down either with a glass of wine or kombucha depending on what time of day it is, and I'll have my bath and something on my iPad with a Netflix show or something, and just allow myself a time for a good soak. And just give myself something that day. And it's almost like I'll plan it and look forward to it. And so then that's the thing that is taking space in my mind versus the other, which doesn't deserve space in my mind. So yes, I have to say I'm not the best at self-care either. I fall into the same habits as everybody else of worrying about my daughter and what she needs, or what my husband and he needs, or what my family and they need. And my husband's even said to me sometimes, he's like, "Why do you put so much energy into everybody else? They don't do the same for you." And I'm like, because that makes me happy. So, but yeah, it's just we just do have to remember to take care of ourselves, because if we're no good, we're no good to anybody else.
So true. I appreciate you sharing that, Rachel. Your bath time sounds out of this world. Like, I have a lot of
the other things too, you got to do, like, yeah, I do love my baths, and it's the only thing I can kind of carve my time out for. Sometimes I can't usually get away for a pedicure, especially these days, but yeah, I mean, I'll journal sometimes, or just write things down. It's like Rhonda said, it's in you, it's pent up. You've got to get it out. You've got to get that release out. And I know we keep coming back to the pressure cooker or analogy, but I love to cook. I have an Instapot. So it's like the quick release versus the natural release. It's like, you just gotta let it, naturally come out as it will, or else it's just going to blow. And at least if you're taking care of yourself, and you're saying you're being mindful of what you need, then you can have your release as it comes to you, and you can have more control over that. Versus if you're doing the opposite, then it's probably not going to come out in the most beautiful of ways. I definitely had my struggles with alcohol in the early stages, and I'm not proud to admit it, but I would drive under the influence without my seatbelt on, screaming at some loud music, singing to it, because it was like I was trying to dare the universe into doing it again. And I wanted to have control over my life in some way. And I think about that now, and I'm like, that's just so weird. Like, why, that my brain thought that made sense to react that way. But it was just, I think that when you go through a traumatic event like that, you're just desperate to find any kind of control, even if it's in a negative way. And so luckily that period of my life was short-lived. And but I can say that there were some unhealthy habits that I took part in directly after, and it's completely normal, and it's something that you just have to work through as well, and recognize this is not good for me. I need to stop this because it's preventing me from getting better. It's there. Society can put a lot of roadblocks in our way, like not believing a victim, or blaming them for some stupid reason or another. We also put roadblocks in our own way, in our own path, a lot as well. And in those unhealthy habits is just an example of that. So we just have to come to the realization that this isn't good for me. It's preventing me from getting better. It's preventing my healing, and set those aside, get them off our path.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that it's absolutely normal too, because I don't want anyone to feel like, there's no judgment, right? You're doing what you're doing to just try to feel better and try to cope with what happened. It's absolutely normal, all of those responses to things like trauma. And so I love what you said though, where in the long run, it's not helping me. And so if anyone ever needs help to find what those healthy coping mechanisms are, please just reach out to, either the VSC or your local rape crisis center or your counselor, and kind of just brainstorm those other things so that you can start moving forward as far as to healthy coping mechanisms that can really help in the long run. Rachel, when planning this podcast, you brought up the concept of grief. So could you describe the role of grief that it could have for a survivor when it comes to sexual trauma, and how could a survivor give themselves the space to process this grief?
Yeah, I think a lot of times when people think of grief, they associate it only with death. they're like, but grief and the feelings of grief, the steps of processing and acceptance are the same for, of anything that was traumatic in our lives that might be unexpected or create a shift and change. So in a way, it kind of is like a death. For me, it was, my life forever changed after that. There was the Rachel prior and then the Rachel after. And that Rachel prior, a part of that, in a way, there was a death there, because there's a new person now. And I don't know if that makes sense, but I guess for any change that we have, it is completely natural to have the feelings of grief. And a lot of that, it starts with denial. I think, the first thing, there were a lot of things, how my brain processed those events. And it was, one of them, I remembered things differently because I remember how I described the first encounter with the police was that, I saw him in my hallway and I tried to run away and I tripped and, he came upon me. And my brain kept going back to that doesn't make sense. How did that happen? That's not the way it happened. How did I fall? What did I trip on? I don't remember tripping, but I must have tripped, until my mind finally settled on what actually happened. And that was that he came up from behind me and actually tackled me. And I have no idea why, other than that was the first moment of contact with him. And so my brain was protecting me from that and telling me, no, that didn't happen. This happened. This over here happened. And so denial can be a very powerful thing. But then, I remember going through all the feelings of anger, of bartering. No, why did this happen to me? It's just a process to get to acceptance of that event. Grief is just, it's one of those things where it's going to come upon us because of things that happen in our life out of our control. And it's the process of grief and allowing ourselves to go through it is really the only thing we do have control over. It's just one of those things that we just have to allow ourselves the space to do it and to accept it.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel.
I don't know if that helps. I was kind of rambling there.
No. I love that you brought up the fact that, yeah, you're right. And I have to say that I thought this way too. I only associated grief with death. And so I think that it's an important thing to bring up when it comes to things like trauma. And I appreciate you sharing your experience going through it. Rhonda, I know we talked a little bit about the services, but I just was wondering if you could talk a little bit about VSC services that we offer to survivors of sexual violence, and then what the VSC could do to help survivors who may be feeling overwhelmed about their sexual assault anniversary. I know we talked a little bit about it, but if you want to lean in on anything.
What we do at the Victim Service Center is, we provide crisis counseling for anyone who wants to call our crisis helpline. When we meet with clients, we do sessions with them. It can be, a crisis session. We also offer, once they've gone through crisis sessions for about, approximately 90 days, if they still desire, we can move them over to the therapy department. And then they can go dive in deeper with the therapy department. We have excellent crisis counselors and we have excellent therapists here at the Victim Service Center. But like I said, we have, like I said, the services, with sessions, and we can meet weekly or bi-weekly. And if the individual cannot reach their crisis counselor or their therapist, like I said, our crisis helpline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day of the year. And we encourage survivors to call our helpline. when they start getting overwhelmed.
Perfect. Yeah. And they can be connected with one of our master's level crisis counselors by the third ring, I think is.
Yes. We answered the helpline by the third ring, and you will be talking to a master level crisis counselor. They all have a degree in either social work, mental health counseling, marriage and family. So we have a wide variety of crisis counselors who are willing and ready to help, and they really enjoy helping.
Yeah, and they've been on a lot of these podcasts with me. And so I love all of our advocates. I love all of our therapists, of course. They're all rock stars. I wanted to ask you, Rachel, what services at the VSC helped you the most during your healing journey?
Oh gosh, I would, the VSC has a very, very special place in my heart. I attribute to them, my success in healing a great deal. I feel fortunate about a lot of things, from the events that happened to me, from, like I said, my support system, to all the men and women that were involved in my case. But I think the most that I am grateful for is that the police officer who responded to my 911 call had VSC's business card in his pocket and took me there afterwards. Not a lot of victims, I found out later, have the luck, the fortune to have a program like the VSC in their community. Some victims are taken to a hospital to have their rape kit administered. A bright, sterile, loud environment that is cold, and you're a number. And it's just, I can't imagine going from that traumatic event to that type of environment. The VSC, the nurse examiners were patient. The lights were low. Their voices were low. They waited for my cues. They were amazing. And it was like being in a womb, so to speak. It really was. It was, I felt safe. I felt protected. And that's so important for a victim to feel directly after such an event where they feel the immense opposite. So, that I was so lucky to receive their services on day one, within hours. I know other victims, unfortunately, that did not get the same, and their journeys started much later. So I attribute a lot of my healing to, the help and involvement that I've had with the VSC. And events like this definitely helped me. Being able to talk about my story and be able to help others with it and make something good out of it is very, very helpful. And for my husband as well, he knew me at the time, and it was, events like this have a ripple effect across those that know us and love us. And he was not immune to that. And so as a secondary victim, he was also able to do a blog post for the VSC, and he still talks about that to this day, how healing that was for him, how helpful it was for him. Not just to go to events and go to different things to speak with me, but it's telling your story, talking about it each time can be very healing. And each time you tell your story, and each time you talk about it, it takes the power of that event away. And so I'm wholly grateful to the VSC for not only giving me those initial services in the beginning, even giving me back a change of clothes, because all my clothes were taken into evidence. I mean, they gave me back a lot of things that evening. But, they've also given me the opportunity to give back to my community and to myself in return, with all of the therapy and support and services that they provide. So yeah, I can't say enough good things about VSC and how lucky we are to have them in our community.
Thanks so much, Rachel. And thank you again for being on this podcast and talking about it. I really appreciate you being here. I think that your story is just so powerful, and it just brings so much hope, I think, to survivors. And on this podcast, I always sign off by saying that healing is not linear, and I think we were kind of alluding to that earlier. And I think survivors may feel they are losing progress in their healing journey if they feel themselves feeling overwhelmed during their trauma anniversary, for example. So what would you say to a survivor that may be feeling like they are regressing?
I felt like that. I think the main thing to keep focus on is that as dark as things may seem at any given time, there is light. Everything has an end. And that includes, dark times and dark feelings. And it's just a matter of, doing what you need to do to get through those. But there is light at the end. There is hope. It's oftentimes hard to reclaim that power that an event like that has over you. But it's just important to do that. It's important to remind yourself that no shame belongs with any victim for what happened to them. It only belongs with the person that hurt them. And by remaining silent or by denying the events only protects that person and not yourself. And it's just really important to just reclaim that power for yourself. Allow yourself the space to understand that it's not your fault, and it's an event that just may have happened, and that you will get through. You are strong enough to get through it. A lot of people said to me afterwards, I don't know what I would have done. I don't think I would have survived. I don't know how you do it. And, I think that you would be surprised what you're capable of, because I think that we are all capable of more than we think that we are. Remind yourself that you are strong. It is not your fault. And you will get through it. You will.
Thank you so much. I love everything that you're saying. And I think that that's a wonderful place to sign off. So thank you for listening to the Victim Service Center podcast. The VSC is a nonprofit organization that provides free confidential counseling services for victims of any kind of trauma in Central Florida. To learn more about our services, please visit victimservicecenter.org. And to everyone listening, healing is not linear and you are not alone. And thank you so much, Rhonda and Rachel, for joining me today.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
All right. Bye. Thanks.